Good evening, everyone. As a start to tonight's proceedings, I would like to acknowledge the Camaragal people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay respects to the elders, both past and present. May I invite our principal, Mrs. McConaughey, to the stage to introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to start with welcoming our students. I'm so pleased you're here tonight, and I know you're going to learn about something that is very important to us and we hold at the heart of Queenwood, and that's character. It was lovely to see you spread around Mossman, Military Road, an hour or so ago, and along the Esplanade and whatever. You were all really well behaved, and I was very proud of you. Thank you, and I hope you're well fed and watered and ready to learn something now. I'd like to recognise our members of council who are present and our president of the QPA, who's also here, and to extend to all of you a very warm welcome. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Professor Anne Brewer, our own Professor Anne Brewer. Professor Brewer is an accomplished leader and a catalyst in the fields of education, leadership and organisational behaviour. Across her remarkable career, she has shaped thinking, practice and people, guiding individuals and institutions towards excellence. She is Emerita Professor at the University of Sydney and was formerly Director of Research at the Scots College. Her career spans psychology, education, business and organisational leadership, giving her a uniquely broad and a deeply informed perspective on how people learn, grow and lead. Professor Brewer has held some of the most senior roles in higher education, including the longest-serving Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Sydney, at times Vice-Chancellor, as well as serving as the Foundation Dean at the University of Newcastle's Sydney campus. In each role, she has been recognised not only for her leadership, but also for her ability to inspire others and drive meaningful change. Now, I should mention something that is little known. Professor Brewer holds not one, but two PhDs, as you do. One in organisational psychology and another in literature and creative writing. It's a rare and powerful combination, bringing together a deep understanding of human behaviour with the ability to communicate ideas with clarity, creativity, and impact. And that combination is evident in her work. She is a prolific writer, the author of 10 books, and has published over 60 research papers in leading journals, book chapters, and conference proceedings. Her professional writing explores careers, leadership, coaching, and mentoring, always with a focus on helping people realise their potential and lead with purpose. Beyond academia, Professor Brewer is an accredited executive coach, a fellow of the AICD, the Institute of Company Directors, and an active contributor to external boards. She brings both intellectual rigour and real-world insight to everything she does. In her leisure time, she writes fiction and enjoys painting and sculpting. Anne is also a passionate advocate for leadership development, particularly for women, and has inspired many to step forward with confidence, courage, and a strong sense of purpose. Today, she will be speaking to us about character formation and education, an area that, among other responsibilities, sits at the heart of her work here at Queenwood and our preoccupation strategically, and one that is increasingly vital in the world in which we live, and I think you would all agree with that. Please join me in welcoming Professor Brewer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McConaughey, I should say, for that kind introduction. And good evening, members of council, executive staff, my colleagues, parents and students and friends of Queenwood. I'll start with asking an important question. Who are you? The caterpillar and Alice looked at each other for some time in silence. At last, the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth and addressed her in a languid, sleepy voice. "Who are you?" said the caterpillar. This was not an encouraging opening for a conversation. Alice replied rather shyly, I hardly know, sir, just at present. At least I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I must have been changed several times since then." Who are you? The question posed by the caterpillar in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland has fascinated generations with its piercing simplicity. Alice's hesitant reply that she hardly knows who she is at present, only who she was that morning, reveals a profound truth. Identity is never static. We are, as Alice intuits, always in the process of becoming. At the heart of that becoming is character, the medium through which our virtues, our values, experiences and reflections coalesce into who we are and who we are becoming. Character is not merely a set of moral virtues or personality traits. It is a dynamic process shaped by the repeated choices we make, the deliberations we reflect upon, and our moral engagement with the world. Our identity is not given. It takes shape over time. Values set the direction. Experience and reflection shape the journey. Even our patterns of thought and action begin to lay the neural foundations of who we become. Tonight, I want to explore that process, drawing on philosophy, social psychology, and neuroscience to show how character becomes the bridge between who we think we are, who we say we are, and how we live. Let me sketch the path we'll take. We begin with why character matters in education, then the enduring philosophical tradition of character from Aristotle and Aquinas to contemporary virtue ethics. I will follow by examining the motivational architecture of values, drawing on Shalom-Schwartz framework. Next, we will consider how character is formed, including the neurocognitive processes that stabilise our dispositions over time. We will explore how character formation contributes to human flourishing before finally reflecting on the implications of all this for learning, education, and life, using a sample from the great books. Why character matters in education. The challenge of making a substantive impact on character formation for our students in school is huge for several reasons. Firstly, schooling has become increasingly technocratic, with its overemphasis on NAPLAN, ATAR results and employability skills, and de-emphasising the epistemic values or virtues. Secondly, the fact that students arrive at school already with a history of character formation behind them, at least in part. And thirdly, the relatively short time that our students spend with us. What helps schools like Queenwood actively engaged in developing the whole person is that our students are with us at the most impressionable time of their life. To address this challenge of assuring that we make an impact on our students' moral life, our prospective character education program will introduce virtues that are both important for character formation as well as leadership. Virtues that are accepted across a wide range of value traditions supported by empirical evidence in moral and social psychology, neuroscience, and leadership research. Students will be introduced to an understanding of character virtues as personal excellences that can be progressively cultivated in one situation and exhibited appropriately in others. The Aristotelian virtue of practical wisdom will facilitate their sensitivity to specific contexts through defining a personal purpose aligned to the right way to do the right thing. How will we achieve this? Research tells us that young people are characterised by 5 main features. Firstly, identity explorations, where they're attempting to clarify their sense of who they are and what they want out of life. Secondly, instability due to fluctuations in school life, friendships and family life. Thirdly, a self-focus due to the relative lack of obligations and commitments to others at this time in their lives. Fourthly, feeling in between, always in transition from one stage in life to another, from home to kindergarten, from year 2 to year 3, from junior primary to senior primary, from senior primary to junior high, from junior high to the middle years, from the middle years to the senior years, and then the anticipation of life beyond year 12. Finally, the hopes and expectations of not only the students themselves, but also the weight of expectations and hopes of their parents, their teachers and significant others, resulting from dreams yet to be tested and pressures yet to be met. Given these 5 features, it is possible to identify opportunities and challenges for character and leadership development for our students. According to research, the identity explorations of young people and their shifting choices renders growing up not only exceptionally full as we know today, but also unstable. Such instability is accompanied by a significant degree of provisionality regarding the future, which may result in insecurity and inertia if there is no wider frame of reference to provide a sense of meaning and purpose. Undoubtedly, the stability and flexibility of moral character is contingent upon situational pressures, felt acutely by young girls and adolescents as they face adulthood. Character will always be exhibited in situations specific to the demands that a person perceives, whether they're real or not. Through our character education program, our students will be guided in fostering self-awareness according to a range of diverse situational factors, thereby increasing their potential for demonstrating virtuous action in different settings. The self-focus that characterises puberty through to early adulthood will have the potential to be an opportunity as well as a challenge for character development. While we will encourage practices of self-reflection aimed towards personal formation and moral action, we will need to be mindful of the other side of self-focus, that is the potential for pathogenic narcissism, exhibited as self-entitlement, which has been identified consistently by researchers as a particular disposition of young people today. The key symptoms of self-entitlement include high demands, disregarding rules, blaming others, ingratitude, and intense anger when expectations are not met. To productively de-centre the self and situate appropriate self-focus, the central virtues that we emphasise are service learning, gratitude and humility, qualities that will be practiced within networks of relationships both inside and outside Queenwood, to provide students with a wider remit of meaning and purpose. The in-between nature of students' lives as they transition through schooling will be conceived as a time for preparing for the responsibilities that are on the horizon of adulthood. Most importantly, all our students, without exception, need a formal opportunity to lead. If not, we distance young people from their ability to learn how to influence others. Many young people have an unrealised aptitude for influencing others, and this needs to be tested in a safe learning environment. Not testing one's influencing skills risks obscuring the everyday forms of leading, disengaging students with the potential to lead, and possibly breeding pessimism, ungrounded idealism, and so on. So many adults coming to a leadership position for the first time struggle with how to influence others, how to bring people with them and not against them. So many adults are either apprehensive about leading others or convinced of their entitlement to lead, such that their leadership fails. I believe that good followers make good leaders. The focus on character will address the leadership challenge, setting leadership preparation within a framework of moral formation, giving students a way to conceive of leadership formation in the broadest sense, including through followership and not only through the narrow lens of the acquisition of a title of prefect or captain, which is invested with positional power. Who do you hope to be? Will be a central question which fits with research suggesting that character strivings and character prospection are important features of a student's school life. A crucial part of this will be to confront failure as an opportunity for growth rather than to conceal it as an expression of some fixed identity. For the hopes and expectations of young people to endure, they will need to become resilient to the kinds of failure that they are likely to encounter. Character education will address truth through questioning, how to use evidence and explain issues in a non-partisan way. Followership and leadership will be explicit themes, helping students to reflect on their own experiences of failure and developing practices of resilience as important followership and leadership competencies. We will also adopt a practice of Socratic inquiry, where the primary role of facilitators in the program will not be didactic instruction, instead creating learning communities where facilitators will become co-participants in the dialogue. This approach ensures the student voice emerges for all participants and to ensure a diversity of voices are being chosen and heard. Small cohorts of students will develop an understanding and practice of leadership centred on important character virtues, the qualities necessary for them to contribute to a civil society, to further the common good in whatever way they choose. The outcomes of the program will be measured against the students' views taken as a baseline at the beginning of the program. However, as we know, formal character education has its critics. As education generally has become more technocratic in its orientation, some people question whether schools should focus on character at all, partly because there is little consensus about what the content of character education should be, given that values differ or they declare that teaching values is impossible. And yet others reject character education, seeing it too closely linked to Western civilization. Those sitting on the fence claim that articulating and defining values is sufficient. I argue the opposite. First, character is essential for academic success, not separate from it. And second, virtues and the values they express have been historically and remarkably consistent across cultures and civilizations, as I will demonstrate. Aristotle argued that virtue is not something we simply learn. It is something we form through habit. For example, we don't become environmentally responsible by talking about sustainability. We become environmentally accountable by consistently making sustainable choices and acting accordingly, like reducing our use of plastic, by recycling well, or minimising our energy use, to the point that we feel guilty if we don't. The medieval thinker Thomas Aquinas extended this insight, describing virtues as habits and that guide us towards what is good and which will help us flourish. When we look across the principal moral traditions, Christian, Buddhist, Islamic and Jewish, and compare this with the philosophies of Aristotle and Aquinas, the continuity is striking. The virtues that you can see on the slide appear in every culture, yet they are not innate. So what do we mean by virtues? Virtues are enduring patterns of thinking, acting and responding which shape who we are becoming. They guide not just what we do, but why we do it, steering us toward what is good and right, not merely what is easy. And crucially, virtues are not the same as intelligence or talent. A student may be brilliant, but without acting virtuously towards others, that brilliance will not serve them well, nor anyone else for that matter. To see the difference between virtues and values in action, we can turn to a well-known example from literature. In doing so, I argue that virtues matter more than values when it comes to forming character. Why? Because while values are what we claim to hold, virtues are what we demonstrate. Literature has always been one of the places where character is most clearly revealed in action. Take Daisy Buchanan from The Great Gatsby. She understands the value of truth, yet avoids it when it becomes personally costly to her. After a hit-and-run accident, Daisy refuses accountability for it and allows Gatsby to take the blame. She knows what is right, but she does not act on it, and worse still, leaves town to avoid taking responsibility. And that is the difference. Values without virtue do not hold. It is only in acting, especially when it is difficult, when it is personally costly to us, that character is formed. Social psychology helps us understand why people like Daisy escape the truth and fail to act accordingly, or to act courageously. The Schwartz values model, which is what you can see on the slide, presents an array of values as a dynamic system organised in a circle where relationships between values matter as much as the values themselves. Values positioned next to one another are compatible and tend to be expressed together in actions. In contrast, values on the opposite sides of the circle exist in tension, meaning that prioritising one often requires us compromising on another. The two central axes structure this model. The first axis contrasts openness to change with conservation, the pull between innovation, curiosity and independence on the one hand, and stability and order and tradition on the other. The second axis contrasts self-enhancement and self-transcendence, the tension between personal success, ambition, competition, against the concern for others, fairness and collective well-being. We can use Schwartz's model to translate these value domains into habits. For example, openness to change becomes curiosity and risk-taking, while conservation becomes emotional regulation and reliability. The power of Schwartz's circumplex lies in revealing that character formation is not about maximising all the values simultaneously, but about navigating the tensions between them. The wiser we become in life, the more we recognise that there are inevitable and difficult trade-offs, and we need to make deliberate, situational, sensitive choices about which values to prioritise, when and why. The values we prioritise are evident and inferred by our actions. Recent advances in neuroscience demonstrate a biological account of how our actions become predisposed to acting virtuously. 3 neural systems are especially relevant. Habit learning systems in the basal ganglia reinforce repeated behaviours. When actions are performed consistently in stable contexts, they become increasingly automatic, helping explain how virtues, or vices for that matter, solidify into dispositions. The prefrontal cortex supports executive functions such as planning, impulse control, and moral reasoning. These capacities enable young people to align their actions with long-term goals and values. They also learn to delay immediate gratification for a higher gain in the future. Emotional and social learning systems involve the amygdala and medial prefrontal cortex, shaping empathy, trust, and moral emotions. These systems underpin social virtues such as compassion and fairness. Together, these mechanisms verify that character is not an abstract moral ideal, which we often think of it as such, but a neurodevelopment pattern of behaviour, emotion, and reasoning shaped by our experiences every day, positive or negative. To understand how such formation occurs, I want to remind us of what the learning brain is. It continuously reorganises itself through life in 5 key phases, allowing new learning and the gradual consolidation of habits and dispositions. Learning is grounded in perception and action. Our body's physical engagement with the world shapes how knowledge and skills are acquired. Learning is socially and culturally situated, shaped by the norms and practices of the communities in which we reside. Schools, like families, become microcultures where values are enacted and reinforced. Emotion and cognition are biologically intertwined. Feelings influence our attention, our memory, our motivation, and moral judgment, making emotional life central to learning who we become. The brain constantly regenerates predictions based on experience and learns by detecting mismatches between expectation and reality. To illustrate how these features operate in practice, consider a Year 10 science class assigned a group project on renewable energy. Amara became the project lead for her group. Like any student, Amara viewed this project as just any ordinary assignment, another task, another deadline. On the first day, her project group gathered around a table scattered with laptops, with conversations erupting all at once. Amara tried to speak, then stopped, then tried again. Eventually, she raised her hand and suggested to her group that they take turns sharing ideas. She wasn't aware of it, but each time she did this, her brain was reorganising itself, strengthening the pathways that support calm coordination and leadership. This is the brain plasticity in action. As the weeks went on, her learning was shaped by the physicality of the experience, listening to others, shifting her posture when tension rose, noticing the relief in the room when she synthesised a messy discussion into something workable. These moments were teaching her as much about herself as about renewable energy. The group gradually formed it into its own microculture, developing inside jokes, rules about who was doing what to complete the assignment, and so on. Amara started to absorb these norms automatically. This is how socialisation works, learning from participation in shared practices. Emotion threaded through the process. Amara felt irritation when someone arrived unprepared, pleased when the group solved a tricky problem, and satisfaction when a lazy team member finally did some work. These feelings were shaping her attention, motivation, and judgment. the affective dimension of who she was becoming. And throughout the project, Amara was continuously anticipating her peers. If I give her this task, will she follow through? If I phrase it this way, will she feel criticised? Her brain was drawing on experience to guess what might happen next and adjusting her actions when reality didn't match her expectations. She had to refine her behaviour continuously in the group in order to complete the assignment. By the end of the term, the group produced a thoughtful, well-organised presentation. Amara accepted the teacher's praise, unaware of the deeper transformation taking place. But from outside, it was clear, through repeated, value-guided actions, listening, organising, mediating, encouraging, her dispositions were stabilising. She was becoming someone who could lead well and confidently. Her story didn't shift in a single moment. It shifted in a dozen of small, unnoticed ones, each one shaping the next version of who she was becoming. Neuroscience reminds us that character formation is grounded in the plasticity of the brain, experiences of moral action, also reflection and habituation, habit forming, which reshape our neural structures, stabilising the dispositions that allow flourishing to emerge. Philosophically, this framework situates character as the bridge between who we are and who we are becoming. In character education, expectations will need to be clear. If the development of character is life's work, it will also be true that there are periods of life which are going to be more formative than others. We can realistically expect of students over what can we really realistically expect of students over a short period of time, and what should we sensibly invest in character education, given other competing demands of the curriculum, co-curriculum and leisure time, which will remain open questions. Our character education program assumes that intellectual and behavioural changes congruent with the development of moral character will be possible through focused and sustained interventions grounded in leadership. Students will be encouraged to think what they value in themselves and others, and particularly for senior students, showing them the value of transition from a sole concern to what David Brooks has termed resume virtues, to include alongside these a deeper concern for the eulogic virtues that reflect moral character, the sort of things that we often say when somebody has passed. We talk about what kind of person they are. Actions and gestures will speak louder than words. This approach to character education will occur alongside topics such what makes you, you, virtues and vices translated as superpowers and vulnerabilities, role modelling, friendships, and planning your flourishing purpose. Aristotle's idea of flourishing presents well-being as an active, lifelong process rather than a fixed state. He argued that to truly live well, we must live deliberately, guided by purpose and virtue, make wise choices by cultivating values like Queenwood's truth, courage, and service. But knowing them, saying them, is not enough. We must exhibit them in everything we do. Aristotle held that a flourishing character is also formed through our experiences, our upbringing, extended family, significant supportive relationships, our schooling, how secure we feel emotionally, financially, and spiritually, highlighting the vital socialising role of families, schools, and communities. What's really striking, though, is when we take the effects of our neurocognitions, our actions, our socialisation into account, getting to a sense of well-being requires both effort and agency. Effort and agency by the individual to achieve a truly flourishing state. My model of character formation captures the central idea that flourishing does not emanate from a single personality trait or through feeling happy. It develops through an interconnected system of influences. At the centre is the person's capacity for agency and purposeful action. But that agency is shaped by deeper layers, the habits we practice, the dispositions we form, the identities we construct, and the social situations and spheres we engage in. Surrounding these are the broader cultural norms, values, and developmental processes that influence how character is formed. When these layers align, values are grounded in virtue, dispositions and are strengthened through practice, and when identity and social context support growth, character becomes the foundation for a flourishing life. That brings a sense of well-being. Flourishing, then, is not accidental. It is cultivated over time through the ongoing formation of character across every layer of human development. One important virtue that I wish to highlight is forgiveness, a virtue that heals. Forgiveness is one of the most misunderstood virtues. In forgiving, we are not excusing harm by the other, nor are we forgetting. Nor is forgiving pretending everything is fine. Forgiving is choosing not to be governed by the bitterness of the harm. It is releasing the grip of resentment so that healing, both personal and relational, becomes possible. Research shows that habitual forgiveness improves well-being, strengthens relationships, reduces anxiety, and supports pro-social behaviour, that is, doing good works for others. Forgiveness is for you. It is not weakness. It is strength because it is hard to enact. When we forgive, it frees us to move on and not be defined by the anger associated with the harm or by being victimised by it. While it is a gift we give to others, it is a far bigger gift to ourselves. If character is formed through repeatedly actioning our virtues, then everyday school life matters deeply, because what students repeatedly do shapes who they become, and who they become shapes the world they will go on to engage in and influence. Let me pause here to take stock of my claim. I've argued that flourishing is active, developmental, and virtue-based, and character is formed through experience, practice, and reflection. Now I want to demonstrate that the same development arc, virtues, values, habits, character, flourishing, is visible in all the great books from eons ago to the present day. This is why our Just Read program is so important for our girls, as it embraces so many of life's literacies important to the formation of character. With this in mind, I want to move to discuss one of the great books, War and Peace. If ever there was a time to reread Tolstoy's War and Peace, it is now. War and Peace was written when Russia was on the brink of apocalyptic conflict with Napoleon's France. Tolstoy conveys a realistic sense of foreboding afflicting entire society. Get the feeling? He shows us that it is precisely in such moments of great uncertainty that character, virtue, and moral clarity matter most. Across the novel's vast cast of characters, Tolstoy diagnosed with remarkable precision the same cognitive traps that occupy us today and afflict many of our leaders, both on the big and small stages. Character and leadership are quietly shaped by the thinking traps we fall into. For example, confirmation bias narrows our view, leading us to hear only aligns with what our beliefs are, weakening our judgment. The slippery slope reminds us that poor character rarely emerges suddenly, but through small repeated compromises that can set us adrift from our virtuous life. Meanwhile, the illusion of control, believing we should control more than we can, fosters overconfidence, binding us to the limits and closing us off from humility and insight. Together, these patterns show that wise leadership depends not just on decisions, but on awareness of how we think, what we ignore, and where small choices may ultimately lead us. Two characters in War and Peace illuminate this with clarity. The first is Napoleon. Brilliant, celebrated, and utterly convinced of his own power, Napoleon believes he controls the movements of armies, the course of history, and the fate of nations. He treats soldiers as chess pieces and mistakes his own will for the engine of events. Tolstoy is merciless and shows us that, like some of our public leaders today, Napoleon is not without precedent, but is instead a resurgent of past trends. Tolstoy demonstrated Napoleon's rise to power by how he achieved that by appealing to the popular support of the people and presenting himself as a defender of France at a time when the elite class were ineffective. Once in control, Napoleon reshaped French society through sweeping legal and institutional reforms, often disregarding existing norms to consolidate his authority. He carefully managed his public image through the state-controlled media and propaganda, ensuring his rule was portrayed as necessary and heroic. Napoleon also promoted the idea that acting in the nation's interest justified overriding legal constraints, reinforcing his position above the traditional checks and balances. Tolstoy points to Napoleon's lack of character, his self-entitlement, vanity, insecurity, and unwillingness to compromise. However, the failure of lasting peace in that society was also down to the character of the ineffective elites and the populace who voted for him in the 2 or 3 plebiscites at the time, or not showing up to vote due to their apathy or intimidation. Napoleon doesn't stand apart from his situation. He exists because of it. His identity and actions are an outcome of the circumstances around him. His illusion of control, his refusal to listen to others, and his contempt for those beneath him in the hierarchy are character flaws which eventually resulted in his failed leadership and exile. The second figure in War and Peace is Kutuzov, the ageing Russian general who saves his country not through brilliance or daring, but through a quality that seems rarer and harder to cultivate throughout history to the present day: wisdom. That is understanding the limits of one's own power and control. Kutuzov symbolises one important aspect of leadership, and that is not imposing his will on events. Like Amara in the mini case study, he listens, he waits, he attends to the small moments and to the sentiments of the people around him. He makes decisions not from ego, but from a clear-eyed reckoning of what is and what is not within his control. Tolstoy's portrait of Kutuzov is not charismatic. He is not inspiring in any conventional sense, but he is, in Tolstoy's telling, the only one who truly leads, because he understands that real leadership flows upward from the people, not downward from the person at the top. By the way, in my view, it's both. It's a balance between both up and down. What makes this more than a literary observation is Tolstoy's insistence that Kutuzov's leadership capacity was not innate, it was formed. It was the product of long experience, repeated reflection, and the gradual cultivation of habits of attention, patience, and humility. In the language we have been using tonight, it was character, formed slowly through the same neurodevelopmental process we've been tracing through Aristotle and the neuroscience of habituation. And crucially, none of Tolstoy's characters arrived at moral maturity without first making serious mistakes. Another character, Nikolai Rostov, gambles away his family fortune. He stumbles repeatedly before finding his way. The point I'm making is that Tolstoy's characters became less imperfect over time, and that, he suggests, is the most honest account of how moral character develops. This is the vision of character formation I want to leave with you, and I believe that Tolstoy wanted to leave with us. That is the slow, raw, and faltering work of who we are becoming, guided by taking on virtues expressed through our values, shaped by our experience, and anchored in the kind of reflective humility that Kutuzov embodied and that we as educators and parents are called upon to model every day. If Tolstoy gave us the grand sweep of history to examine character formation, Jane Austen gave us the drawing room, and yet her insights into moral formation are no less penetrating. For example, across Pride and Prejudice and Emma, Austen diagnoses with extraordinary clarity the everyday habits that shape, distort, and eventually hone character. While Austen's world and ours here at Queenwood may seem smaller than Tolstoy's battlefields, the stakes are just as high, as they depend on the formation of judgment, humility, and self-knowledge. Austen's characters fall prey to cognitive traps as recognisable today as they were in 1813. The seductions of first impressions, the ease of self-deception, and the tendency to interpret the world in ways that flatter our own sense of ourselves. In Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth Bennet's wit and intelligence become liabilities when compared with a misplaced confidence in her own discernment. She is hasty to judge, to assume, and to trust the narrative that best suits her pride. Darcy, for him, his part is no less ensnared. His reserve, his social awkwardness, and his class consciousness bind him to the perspectives of others. Both are clever, neither is wise. Their character formation eventually lies in recognising the limits of their own perception. In Emma, Austen sharpens this theme even further. Emma Woodhouse is perhaps Austen's most explicit study in the dangers of unexamined confidence and entitlement. Charming, privileged, and accustomed to being right, Emma mistakes her imagination for insight and her good intentions for judgment. She manipulates, misreads, and mismanages the lives of those around her, not so much out of malice, rather out of a failure to see herself clearly. Austen is unsparing. Emma's errors are not accidents. They are the predictable consequences of character insufficiently formed. Like Tolstoy, Austen demonstrates that character is not fixed, it is formed. In Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth's transformation begins the moment she confronts the uncomfortable truth of her own prejudice. Darcy's transformation begins when he recognised the moral costs of his pride. Emma's transformation begins when she finally sees the harm caused by her self-assurance. None of them grow without humiliation. None mature without effort and discomfort. But through reflection, correction, and the slow cultivation of better habits, they become more capable of love, friendship, and moral responsibility. Austen's vision of character formation is intimate rather than epic, but no less profound. She reminds us that the great moral dramas of life unfold not only in moments of crisis, but in the quiet daily work of attending to our own biases, listening more carefully, and learning to see others and ourselves with great clarity. Her novel suggests that moral maturity is not the achievement of perfection, but the willingness to revise our assumptions, to apologise when we are wrong, and to grow less imperfect over time. This is the Austen account of character I want to leave you with, that the formation of virtue begins in the smallest acts of attention, that humility is the gateway to wisdom, and that the work of becoming, slow, relational, and often uncomfortable, is the most enduring education that we can undertake. As these works demonstrate, character formation is the narrative arc of our lives, the story of our lives, developed not in words, rather through acting virtuously, reflecting honestly, and choosing wisely. It is only through character formation that we learn how to lead, through slow habituation, by influencing others through a dialogic process between listening, enabling, and growing a vision together, and how we grow out of and respond to circumstances. Our task at Queenwood and in society is to attend carefully to the process guiding our students and ourselves through the dynamic, unfolding work of who we are becoming. Thank you. Any questions?
I thought it was very interesting, particularly at the start when you discussed the potential of, well, of course, failure has a lot of intrinsic detriments to us, but the potential for failure to grow our character. In your opinion, is there any specific actions we ought to take in our life to ensure that failure is not a hindrance and actually we are able to grow ourselves from this failure?
It's a good question. So one of the things after failure is, I guess, to ask the question, why did it happen? What was the issue? So use your problem-solving skills to really engage into that and to really think through, what did I learn from that situation? So failure does require a lot of self-reflection. The problem with failure is that we tend to lead into the emotion. And what we need to do is actually distance ourselves. We won't get over the emotion immediately. So once the annoyance or the disappointment or the anger or whatever the emotion is that you're feeling, to sort of let that pass and then move to the point where you can actually take much more an objective or clinical view of it. And that often helps by having someone else. It could be a friend, it could be a mentor, one of the buddies that we have here in the school and so on, or even a teacher, and actually work through what happened, what could you have done better, what have you learnt from that? And then hopefully remember that. I mean, I think we tend to focus on our failures perhaps more than our successes, but what we need to do is focus on the failures in a productive way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just would like to know, as a parent or the teacher, what the roles that we play to help our children to form their characteristics like.
I think it's a similar answer in a way. Our children come home from school or from meeting with friends and so on. Often they've had a great time, other times they've had not such a great time. I think the role of anyone, the greatest gift that we can give to anyone is to listen. I think listening is really powerful, and I think sometimes as parents, maybe even as teachers, we want to step in and fix it. It's really important that we let students find their voice and find their way, that we're not there to rescue them. Now, obviously, it's age dependent, and of course, if they're in deep emotional suffering, there's the support and all of those things initially. But when that time has passed, it's really important that we listen. We listen to hearing how they felt in their own words, and that we ask them what do they want to do about it, or what do they think they could do about it. Again, I think what we tend to see is people rushing in and trying to rescue the situation, and that's not actually helping them to develop the habit of really problem solving and also making different choices. Okay, well, if there's no one else, I'm going to thank everyone for attending, and good night.
Thank you, and Professor Brewer, for that fascinating outline on, I think, something that's important to all of us. All of us are here because we care about our students, your children, our students, our girls and girls. This is one of the main pieces of your business. You're here to learn academically, but what has just been discussed is really central to everything that we're trying to do here at school for you as the future people, the future leaders, the future contributors of our society, but also how you can live good, fulfilling, flourishing lives. I loved it because it's a topic very dear to my heart, so beautifully and cleverly put together with science, with history, with literature, which I love, and you told the story of it, some complex ideas in a way which was accessible to all of us. Now it's up to us as educators and you as parents and you students, you girls, your own responsibility to respond to that by becoming the best versions of yourself that you can be. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Professor Brewer. Thank you.